this? This is part 4, isn't it? Part 4, Teddy. Of The Thing Invisible by William Hope Hodgson. Alrighty, where are we? When we last left off... It's always good when it starts early. Where last we left off, he had locked himself in his room after being attacked in the chapel. Alright. In my room, I sat for a while until I had steadied down something to the normal. After a time, I commenced to strip off the armour. I saw then that both the chainmail and the plate armour had been pierced over the breast, and suddenly it came home to me that the thing had struck for my heart. Stripping rapidly, I found that the skin of the breast over the heart had just been cut sufficiently to allow a little blood to stain my shirt, nothing more. Only the whole breast was badly bruised and intensely painful. You can imagine what would have happened if I had not worn the armour. In any case, it is a marvel that I was not knocked senseless. Yeah, it is. I did not go to bed at all that night, but sat upon the edge thinking and waiting for the dawn. For I had to remove my litter before Sir Alfred Jarnall should enter, if I were to hide from him the fact that I had managed to duplicate a key. So soon as the pale light of the morning had strengthened sufficiently to show me the various details of my room, I made my way quietly down to the chapel. Very silently and with tense nerves, I opened the door. The chill light of the dawn made distinct the whole place, everything seeming instinct with a ghostly, unearthly quiet. Can you get the feeling? I waited several minutes at the door, allowing the morning to grow, and likewise my courage, I suppose. Presently the rising sun threw an odd beam right in through the big east window, making coloured sunshine all the length of the chapel, and then, with a tremendous effort, I forced myself to enter. I went up the aisle to where I had overthrown my camera in the darkness. The legs of the tripod were sticking up from the interior of a pure. Fuck, I can't read properly. I can't talk properly. I can talk properly. It's always so tempting to have another drink. And I expected to find the machine smashed to pieces. Yet, beyond that, the ground glass was broken and there was no real damage done. I replaced the camera in the position from which I had taken the previous photography, but the slide containing the plate I had exposed by flashlight I removed and put into one side of my pockets, regretting that I had not taken a second flash picture at the instant when I heard those strange sounds up in the chapel chancel. Having tidied my photographic apparatus, I went to the chancel to recover my lantern and revolver, which had both, as you know, been knocked from my hands when I was stabbed. I found the lantern lying hopelessly bent with smashed lens just under the pulpit. My revolver I must have held until my shoulder struck the pew, for it was lying there in the aisle, just above where I believe I cannoned into the pew corner. It was quite undamaged. Having secured these two articles, I walked up to the chancel rail to see whether the dagger had returned or been returned to its sheath above the altar. Before, however, I reached the chancel rail, I had a slight shock, for there on the floor of the chapel, about a yard away from where I had been struck, lay the dagger, quiet and demure upon the polished marble pavement. I wonder whether you will, any of you, understand the nervousness that took me at the sight of the thing. With a sudden, unreasoned action, I jumped forward and put my foot on it to hold it there. Can you understand? Do you? And you know, I could not stop and stoop down and pick it up with my hand for quite a minute. I should think. Afterwards, when I had done so, however, and handled it a little, this feeling passed away, and my reason, and also I expect the daylight, made me feel that I had been a little bit of an ass. Just a little bit. Quite natural, though, I assure you. Yet it was a new kind of fear to me. I'm taking no notice of the cheap joke about the arse. You made the joke. I am talking about the curiousness of learning in that moment a new shade or quality of fear that had hitherto been outside of my knowledge or imagination. Does it interest you? I examined the dagger minutely, turning it over and over in my hands, and never, as I suddenly discovered, holding it loosely. It was as if I were subconsciously surprised that it lay quiet in my hands. Yet even this feeling passed largely after a short while. The curious weapon showed no signs of the blow, except that the dull colour of the blade was slightly brighter on the rounded point that had cut through the armour. Presently, when I had made the end of staring at the dagger, I went up the chancel step and in through the little gate. Then, kneeling upon the altar, I replaced the dagger in its sheath, and came outside of the rail again, closing the gate after me and feeling awarely uncomfortable because the horrible old weapon was back in its accustomed place. You put it there. I suppose without analysing my feelings very deeply, I had an unreasoned and only half-conscious belief that there was a greater probability of danger when the dagger hung in its 5th-century resting place than when it was out of it. You put it there. Yet somehow I don't think this is a very good explanation, when I remember the demure look the thing seemed to have when I saw it lying on the floor of the chancel. Anthropomorphizing. Only I know this, that when I had replaced the dagger, I had quite a touch of nerves, and I stopped only to pick up my lantern from where I had placed it whilst I examined the weapon, after which I went down the quiet aisle at a pretty quick walk, and so got out of the place. But not without being quite, verbose. That the nerve tension had been considerable, I realised. When I had locked the door behind me, I felt no inclination now to think of old Sir Alfred as a hypochondriac because he had taken such hyper-seeming precautions regarding the chapel. I had a sudden wonder as to whether he might not have some knowledge of a long prior tragedy in which the dagger had been given. The butler got stabbed. That was pretty tragic. I returned to my room, washed, shaved and dressed, after which I read a while. Okay, great. Then I went downstairs and got the acting butler to give me some sandwiches and a cup of coffee. Half an hour later I was heading for Burtontree, as hard as I could walk, for a sudden idea had come to me which I was anxious to test. I reached the town a little before 8:30 and found the local photographer with his shutters still up. I did not wait, but knocked until he appeared with his coat off, evidently in the act of dealing with his breakfast. In a few words I made clear that I wanted to use his darkroom immediately, and this he at once placed at my disposal. It was very accommodating. I had brought with me the slide which contained the plate that I had used with the flat... Did he introduce it? Anyway. Yet it was not the plate which I had exposed that I first put into the solution, but the second plate, which had been ready in the camera during all the time of my waiting in the darkness. You see, the lens had been uncapped all that while, so that the whole chancel had been, as it were, under observation. Yeah, but in the dark. You all know something of my experiments in lifeless photography, that is, appreciating light. It was X-ray work that started me in that direction. Yet you must understand, though I was attempting to develop this unexposed plate, I had no definite idea of results, nothing more than a vague hope that it might show me something. Yet because of the possibilities, it was with the most intense and absorbing interest that I watched the plate under the action of the developer. Presently, I saw a faint smudge of black appear in the upper part, and after that others, indistinct and wavering of outline. I held the negative up to the light. The marks were rather small and were almost entirely confined to one end of the plate, but as I have said, lacked definiteness. Yet such as they were sufficient to make me very excited, and I shoved the thing quickly back into the solution. Great. Shouldn't have taken it out to begin with. For some minutes further I watched it, lifting it out once or twice to make a more exact scrutiny, but I can talk. But I could not imagine what the markings might represent, until suddenly it occurred to me that in one of two places they certainly had shapes suggestive of a cross-hilted dagger. Yet the shapes were sufficiently indefinite to make me careful not to let myself be over-impressed by the uncomfortable resemblance, though I must confess the very thought was sufficient to set some odd thrills adrift in me. I carried development a little further, then put the negative into the hypo, and commenced work upon the other plate. This came up nicely, and very soon I had a really decent negative that appeared similar in every respect, except for the difference of lighting, to the negative I had taken during the previous day. I fixed the plate, then having washed both it and the unexposed one for a few minutes under the tap, I put them into methylated spirits for 15 minutes, after which I carried them into the photographer's kitchen and dried them with the oven. In the oven. Whilst the two plates were drying, the photographer and I made an Oh wow, you did that in the photographer's kitchen. Whilst the two plates were drying, the photographer and I made an enlargement from the negative I had taken by daylight. Then we did the same with the two that I had just developed, washing them as quickly as possible, for I was not troubling about the permanency of the prints and drying them with spirits. When this was done, I took them to the window and made a thorough examination, commencing with the one that appeared to show shadowy daggers in several places. Yet though it was now enlarged, I was still unable to feel convinced that the marks truly represented anything abnormal. And because of this, I put it on one side, determined not to let my imagination play too large a part in constructing weapons out of indefinite outlines. I took the two other enlargements, both of the chancel, as you will remember, and commenced to compare them. For some minutes I examined them without being able to distinguish any difference in the scene they portrayed, and then abruptly I saw something in which they varied. In the second enlargement, the one made from the flashlight negative, the dagger was not in its sheath. Yet I had felt sure it was there but a few minutes before I took the photograph. After this discovery, I began to compare the two enlargements in a very different manner from my previous scrutiny. I borrowed a pair of calipers from the photographer, and with these I carried out a most methodical and exact comparison of the details shown in the two photographs. Suddenly I came upon something that set me all tingling with excitement. I threw the calipers down, paid the photographer, and walked out through the shop into the street. The three enlargements I took with me, making them into a roll as I went. At the corner of the street, I had the luck to get a cab, and was soon back at the castle. I hurried up to my room and put the photographs away. Then I went down to see whether I could find Sir Alfred Jarnock. But Mr. George Jarnock, who met me, told me his father was too unwell to rise, and would prefer that no one enter the chapel unless he were about. Young Jarnock made a half-apologetic excuse for his father, remarking that Sir Alfred Jarnock was perhaps inclined to be a little over-careful, but that, considering what had happened, we must agree that the need for his carefulness had been justified. He added also that even before the horrible attack on the butler, his father had been just as particular, always keeping the key and never allowing the door to be unlocked except when the place was in use for divine service, and for an hour each forenoon when the cleaners were in. To all this I nodded understandingly. But when presently the young man left me, I took my duplicate key and made for the door of the chapel like a sneaky little shit. I went in and locked it behind me, after which I carried out some intensely interesting and rather weird experiments. These proved successful to such an extent that I came out of the place in a perfect fever of excitement. I inquired for Mr. George Jarnock and was told that he was in the morning room. "Come along," I said, when I had found him. "Please give me a lift. I've got something exceedingly strange to show you." He strode. No. He was palpably very much puzzled, but came quickly. As we strode along, he asked me a score of questions, to all of which I just shook my head, asking him to wait a little. It's really annoying to answer the fucking question. I led the way to the armory. Here I suggested that he should take one side of a dummy dressed in half-plate armor, whilst I took the other. He nodded, though obviously very bewildered, and together we carried the thing to the chapel door. When he saw me take out my key and open the way for us, he appeared even more astonished, but held himself in, evidently waiting for me to explain. Well, yeah. We entered the chapel, and I locked the door behind us, after which we carted the armoured dummy up to the aisle, to the gate of the chancel rail, where we put it down upon its round wooden stand. Oh man, might be another rating. Wooden stand. Okay. Yeah, there will. "Stand back!" I shouted suddenly as young Jarnock made a movement to open the gate. "My God, man, you mustn't do that!" "Do what?" he asked, half startled and half irritated by my words and manner. Well, yeah, 'cause rude. "1 minute," I said. "Just stand to the side a moment and watch." Fuck, talks down to everyone. Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna leave it at that because... Just because. Yeah, so that was part 4 of, The Thing Invisible. So yeah, experiments, photographs, busting your way into a photographer's house, unannounced, and then demanding that you use his equipment, making a key using a soap impression, going into places when you've been told not to, talking down to your friends while I don't know, I try to picture his friends all sitting around and what they're doing, how they're taking it. Are they listening with rapt attention, or are they kind of looking at him like, wow, you condescending prick. So anyway, until tomorrow night when we read part 5. Cheers.